edition of the Robust Opposition. I'm here with Katie Halper, who is an author, a radio show, and a podcast host. And she describes herself as the Bernie Bro feminist.
I'm a comedian, writer, radio show host, podcast show host called The Katie Halper Show. And I write for places like Rolling Stone and Vice and Salon and The Guardian and Pace. I've been writing a lot at Pace and The Nation.
Yeah, and Katie and I have been Facebook friends. We actually met at UCLA when she was on a panel with Tim Robbins and Rosario Dawson during the Bernie Sanders campaign. We've been talking on Facebook about getting together and having you on the show, but we now have a perfect opportunity with this article that you responded to in The Guardian. The article was written by Susan Bordo, who is a second-wave feminist. The title of the article was The Destruction of Hillary Clinton, Sexism, Sanders, and the Millennial Feminists. And it's based on her new book, The Destruction of Hillary Clinton, which seeks to explain how the most qualified candidate ever to run for president lost the seemingly unstoppable election. And she says in here that it was sexism, partisan politics, and media madness that caused the destruction of Hillary. And she gives some blame to Comey, but basically she says that Bernie splintered and sabotaged the Democratic Party. You were so moved to write a response. What was your basic contention in your case article?
Well, my contention was that there's been a kind of definition or redefinition of feminism where it really lines up around, I mean, I know that obviously this issue goes beyond Sanders and Clinton, but I feel like there's a lot of kind of shorthand in the Sanders-Clinton race, and it serves as a pretty useful proxy. So in general, I think that there's, you know, intersectional feminism, which sounds really kind of academic and pretentious, but it's a pretty useful framing, which is when we look at gender and sexism and feminism, not in a vacuum, but we look at it as how in the ways in which it intersects or overlaps or interacts with other issues. So if you're a straight white woman in upper class, you will have a different experience than a working class white woman who's gay, or a straight working class Black woman. All these things kind of fit into your experience. And a really easy example of that is with, although it goes way beyond this, but is with pay and wage gap issues. So if you're a white woman, you make whatever, I don't know what the rate is now, 71 cents, 78 cents to the white man's dollar. And if you're a Black woman, you make lower than that. And if you're a Latino woman, you make lower than that. So it's a way, it's not just a theoretical thing. It actually, exists in real life. So I was just really frustrated by the way that certain feminists were able to really dominate the narrative so that their candidate was the feminist candidate. Hillary Clinton was the feminist candidate. And in a way that really didn't look at policy. I mean, it was a bad identity. And I've said this before, if you had two identical candidates, one was a woman, one was a man, I would of course go for the woman because we have less representation. That's important. It's an important historical milestone. It's symbolically important. It's, I think, important for people to see. But again, when the policy of one is so much better than the policy of another one, to me, it's a no-brainer that you go with the one whose policies are more feminist. And it's so mind-boggling to me that I don't think a single feminist who supports Hillary even engaged the issue of the minimum wage, which to me is one of the major differences between Hillary and Clinton. I mean, Clinton and Sanders and their kinds of feminism, right? Like Hillary, like, you know, she says human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, and that's great. But Bernie Sanders wants there to be a $15 minimum wage, and Clinton unbelievably was stubborn about that and was happy with 12. And when you have 2/3 of the minimum wage earning workforce being women, it's obviously a women's issue.
Well, you know, I want to say that I agree with you about the upper class women because I am fairly comfortable as far as my socioeconomic status. But since I joined the Occupy movement, I've been socializing with an entirely different class, if you will, of people. And these are people that are really hurting. And I have to tell you that growing up, and I know that you and I had a very similar background. You know, we both went to private schools in New York. We both went to Wesleyan. We were both comfortable. But I think somehow along the line we had a social consciousness and an empathy for people less fortunate for us. And I think while some of these friends of mine, or I should say former friends, because it's very difficult for me to associate with these people now, because they seem so clueless.
Right.
We really broke on this Hillary Clinton campaign, I have to say, because I don't think they understand that 50% of Americans are living on $30,000 or less. That 50% of Americans don't have $300 in the bank to pay for a major car repair. That 50% of Americans are one accident, job loss, or injury away from dire poverty. And I think if they knew that, they might think a little bit differently about Hillary Clinton.
Right. I mean, I think that, my mom grew up, not to go too deep into biography, but my mom grew up very working class and had a very, lefty background, and lots of labor union members in her family. And I went to this summer camp called Kinderland, which was basically founded by this communist party in the 1920s, secular Jews, immigrants, Yiddish speakers. And so I was definitely, and I went to that summer camp. So I was raised with those values, both from my parents and from the summer camp I went to. But I think it's true, there's a difference between, sometimes I think liberals and Clinton supporters are basically they have the same politics as Republicans. They just want, instead of a top 1%, they want a top 10%, and they want a more diverse top 10%. So instead of it being all straight white men, they want a rainbow coalition of elites that are ruling the world, but they want to be more representative. That's an oversimplification, but I don't think it's that off.
Well, you also said something interesting in your article. You said that attributing Clinton's so-called destruction to sexism alone infantilizes her, casts her as a mere victim, and denies her her agency.
Right. So
can you stand on that?
Sure. So one of the things that we saw that I found really disturbing was that there was a total infantilizing and enabling of Clinton. So people, there's that famous, and maybe apocryphal and maybe not, but there's that famous FDR story about A. Philip Randolph approaching him about something, and FDR saying, "Oh, that sounds great, sounds awesome, sure, let's do it." I think it was March on Washington. It was something with civil rights. And then he famously said, "Sounds great, now go out and make me do it." Clinton supporters did not do that at all. They did not go out and make her do that. What they did, and I get it, I say this in my piece a little bit, it's not like I have no empathy or sympathy for where people are coming from. Clinton was attacked during the 90s. She did a lot of crappy stuff, but a lot of the attacks were not because of that. She definitely was under attack from the right wing. And something I've never done, even whenever I've written or spoken about the feminism of Sanders versus of Clinton, I've never denied that she's faced double standards and sexism, because I just think that's silly, because she has. But what we see is a kind of excuse making. I mean, I saw this on so many listservs or private conversations that I was privy to. Well, it's easy for Sanders to be unapologetically pro-choice, but it's hard for Hillary. It's easy to be progressive when you're a man, but it's hard for Hillary. Now, it's not that these things aren't at all true, that there's not a shade of truth to them, but it's a question of the kind of proportion, right? Or the scale. The difference between being a radical man and a radical woman is their differences. Whether or not they're actually radical is another issue, but the differences are not big enough to justify the actual differences between the two candidates, is my point. I mean, I think that there is something like Obama, I think, as a black president, and again, I'm not apologizing for Obama. There's tons of stuff that he did that was really problematic. But there were things that I think everything he did was seen as more radical because he was black than a white president would have been seen doing. But that's kind of another point. Anyway, but Yeah, Clinton, there was no reason she couldn't go to Wisconsin. There was no sexism stopping her from going to Wisconsin. She's a smart woman. She's a calculating woman, just like all politicians. You know, in another piece I wrote for Truthdig, I said something like, you know, it's we have to, if we're feminists, we also have to realize that a woman can be just as Machiavellian and hawkish and centrist as a man. That's part of, it's not something I aspire towards, but it's certainly, you know, this whole idea like of women being inherently kind of mothering or motherly. It's also offensive, and it's just not true.
Well, one thing that she did say in her article that you sort of disagreed with was second wave feminists were seen as women in the movement, the anti-war movement, and even in the civil rights movement to some extent, were seen as sexual partners and helpmates.
Right.
And I know that that is a true thing. I was a little young for that second wave feminism, but I was influenced by it. I read it all when I was in high school. And I was also around in the 90s when Clinton was victimized of the fast right-wing conspiracy. Right. Now, that was a decade where I was got married, had my kids, was remodeling my home, doing a lot of yucky stuff, and I wasn't the political activist that I am today. But I was paying attention to how the media and the right wing was sort of vilifying her. And as a woman, I did feel bad for her.
Right.
But in the 2000s, when I started paying attention more to policy, I realized that she wasn't at all what she was portraying herself to be.
Right.
You know, everyone that talks about Clinton says that she spent her life working on behalf of women and girls. That's all you ever hear. It's almost repeated like a mantra.
They have tons of talking points. I mean, never underestimate. I feel like I sound paranoid, but there's so many talking points that you can just see online and Twitter and stuff. Yeah.
But then all you have to do, you can go back to when she was on the board of Walmart, when she was the governor's wife, and she sat silent while the Walmart workers were trying to unionize, most of them women, right, trying to support their children. And so the list goes on. I mean, I don't have to.
Right. And Liza Featherstone has written a lot on that. She's really great. She's written a lot on Walmart stuff. But yeah, I mean, people are like, oh, you can't hold her responsible for what her husband did. But again, she stumped for a lot of his stuff and she invokes him. So again, we have to it's sexist and infantilizing to be like, oh, she can bring up her husband, but we can't. No, it's one or the other. If she wants to be totally independent from him, fine. But she talked about him on the trail, the campaign trail. So she, as the governor's wife, also stumped for welfare reform, both as the governor's wife and as the first lady. And in fact, Marian Wright Edelman, who she talks to, who Hillary and her supporters like to name drop, who is from the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund. Hillary did work with them, and she did do good work when she was younger. I never buy into either she was a Goldwater girl. I mean, you were saying that you weren't always this political. I admire people who come to politics on their own. So that's another critique I've never really bought into. But she, as the first lady, it was a bad enough welfare reform bill that Marian Wright Edelman wrote an op-ed warning that Bill Clinton couldn't do that. And then when he did it, she said it was pernicious, cruel to children. And her husband, who was working for the administration, quit over it. So again, I'm not saying like she may have, and the thing that was so weird about the Bordo piece is that it really was invested in who Hillary really was. And I'm not saying Hillary wasn't that at one point, but Hillary is not that anymore. Maybe behind closed doors she is, but that's not what she's like that won't be what she would not have been what she would have been like as a president.
I think she spent a lot of time speaking about women and girls, but when it actually came time for her to do something about it,
right.
And also to call it welfare reform is playing into their Luntzian, Frank Luntz's framing.
Right.
It's hardly welfare reform. It kicks millions of women and children off the welfare rolls into dire poverty.
Yeah. Pramila Nadison is also someone who's written a lot about that. She's been on my show too. You should talk to her, but she's written a lot about the welfare reform and how punitive it was and how puritanical it was too.
Yeah, now it said that only a Democrat like Bill Clinton can do do what the Republicans long wanted to do.
Right. That's from Thomas Frank, right?
But deregulating Wall Street, reforming welfare, deregulating media, the bankruptcy bill. I mean, the most horrific things went on during his administration.
Right.
And let me just say that I was always political. I was just the 90s that I took a little bit of a hiatus.
Got it.
I mean, the first political act I did was in 8th grade. I circulated a petition for the McGovern-Hatfield Amendment to end the war.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you weren't, was it that?
In 1970, I went to the first Earth Day.
So was it that, because you talked about how you something changed with you with Occupy, was it that a class consciousness was developed that wasn't there before?
I think I had a class consciousness, but it was more of a
theoretical?
Aesthetic, like it's theoretical.
Right.
Like, I mean, I think you could use the term limousine liberal.
Right.
Or in my case, because I lived in Westchester, I always said Scarsdale socialist.
Right.
But I always had a certain, like I had a foot on each side. And I remember when I was working for a nonprofit called Urban Planning Aid in Boston, working with low-income children in South Boston, teaching them how to use video equipment to do oral histories with their grandparents. Yeah, it was a really good project. There was an organizer, and he said to me, Lauren, at some point you're going to have to stop straddling the fence, and you're going to have to pick which side you're on.
Right.
And it kind of took me a long time. I mean, it took me to basically 2011, and that's really when my life changed.
Yeah.
And that's because I was friends with people who were baristas, union members, minimum wage workers, and even homeless people.
Right.
And I never socialized with people. I mean, it sounds so elitist and embarrassing to even say this on my own show, but
it's true though. Most people don't, and most people just don't admit that. I mean, that's the only difference, is that it's whether or not people admit that. But I think that's actually interesting, because one of the things that's really come out of this Hillary, like DNC versus emerging, what do they call him? Insurgent. The insurgent versus like establishment democratic strategy is this idea that we turn our backs on people who are not woke. Like, you just reminded me when you said you were interacting with people. This is kind of off topic, but I think it's related. There's like this real snobbery towards people who don't know all the nomenclature. They're not up on how to call, like, transgender people. They may not know all the terminology. And there's like I think there's like a real liberal contempt for people on social issues. And there's really, it's weird. There's no empathy for people who don't have access because of class to certain things. And there's this weird also equation of working class with whiteness, which just isn't true. So this is a kind of another issue, but one of the things that really drives me crazy is how I can't, the discussion, the similar thing is that the discussion about Hillary has been equally, I think, kind of like flimsy. The feminist case for Hillary is just as flimsy as the case for like turning our backs on working class voters. And if you're dumb enough to vote for Trump, we don't need you. I mean, the whole thing of we don't need you is so stupid, because we did need everyone. We didn't win. If we're saying like people who didn't want Trump in office, and people are still saying the same thing. It's really horrible. And the sexism thing is relevant because look at what people are doing right now. They're still slamming Sanders. And I know it's beyond Sanders, and Sanders has made mistakes, and I don't idolize him. But again, this guy and Keith Ellison, but really Sanders, because his shtick is being an outsider, he's really trying to push the party in the right direction. And I love when people are like, he's not even a Democrat. I was like, why are you making me love him even more? I'm already sold on him. Why are you telling me this stuff? But there really is. There's a very intense narrative that's trying to equate any economic justice as a white privilege issue, which is so absurd. And I don't know if you know this woman, Sally Albright. Okay. She actually.
I wanted you to mention that article that you shared with me, where she said Nina Turner was Bernie's Omarosa.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I'm sorry, but there's a real dishonesty problem amongst the Clintonite liberals. I really try to be honest. Like, I always break things down. I'll be like, was it problematic that blah, 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 blah? Yes. Like, can Bernie sound a little bit tone deaf? Sure. I think that's true. Are his policies way better? Yes. And one of the things Sally Albright famously tweeted economic inequality is only an issue for straight white men. The rest of us have bigger problems to worry about, which was such a heinous and stupid and backwards thing to say. I mean, if you're intersectional, you get that actually, if you're going to generalize, economic inequality is a bigger problem for people of color and for women. Like I was just explaining. I mean, it's just insane. They're so bad at this. They have such little regard for actual disenfranchised people. They're just props for them. I mean, that's really it. That's all they are. And they try to hide their like really neoliberal bourgeois ideology behind some weird like pseudo woke white allyship that's just absurd and offensive. And it's so obvious. The stuff they say about race is just so painful. Like they have no idea what they're talking about. It flattens everything into a monolith so that there's one feminist position or one female position or one Black position or one Latino position. And the thing is like Bordo doesn't realize, a lot of people don't realize, or they do realize and they're pretending it's not the case. People of all backgrounds have politics. Like there are Black socialists, there are Black conservatives. The idea that there's like a Black view is really problematic, to use words that people always use, these people being academics. It's really not okay to pretend that that's the truth. And it's really not okay. I see this all the time on social media. And I know Twitter's not the real world, but it's a window into where the soul would be of the media. But they're just hijacking people. They hide behind them. They point to one person of color who thinks this, and then they pretend that that is the voice of the entire community. And it's really offensive and belittling. And this was awkward for me to admit, but there's a lot of this in a lot of women who I hear talking about Clinton, which is there's this really like personalized view of history and politics. And I've kind of avoided saying that because there's such a sexist trope about it, but it's actually sexist for me to pretend it doesn't exist. That she really sees, like you were saying, there was misogyny. There is misogyny. There's a lot of hypocrisy among men on the left, right? There is among liberal men. I guess on the right, it's not hypocrisy because they just own it. There's sexism and misogyny. But that doesn't mean that you then vote for someone who you identify with, whose policies, it's very selfish for me to vote for someone because I feel I identify with this person more. And because this other guy reminds me of people who were problematic towards me without looking at their policies again. And the reason I don't think it's sexist for me to say that is because if I posited that only women did this, or if I posited that there's something inherently female about this, that would be messed up. But it's not. It just happens to be that things that are sexist tropes happen to be true, but they're true about men and women.
What you said earlier about different socioeconomic statuses having different viewpoints, one of the former friends that I was arguing with is an African-American male who I went to Wesleyan with, who basically posted, thank you for getting us Trump.
Right.
Because he assumed that I was one of those Bernie people that wouldn't vote for Hillary.
Right.
And of course, I didn't vote for Hillary, but I knew that she was going to
win California. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to write in Bernie. He was qualified writing him. I don't know if you ever saw my show with Dale Dines that I did, Pornography and Feminism. But it's really interesting. The second portion of that show was about how neoliberalism has affected feminism. And the point was, as Dale was saying, and she's about my age, that the second wave feminism was about collective liberation, whereas this new feminism is about individual empowerment.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like this Sheryl Sandberg
lean-in feminism, right? Or pantsuit feminism.
You climb to the top of the corporate ladder, then that's all that matters.
Right.
And I have to say that when I started my career in the cable television industry in the early 80s, I would go to these conventions. Women in Cable was a professional association started by actually the wife of my boss, Kay Koplovitz, who started up the USA Network.
Oh, wow.
She was the first woman to head a cable network. And to her credit, she started Women in Cable to try to help other women along. So I was very excited to go to my first Women in Cable convention. And what I always remember, and have always recounted from that, was that when I tried to talk to some of these powerful women who were much higher than me, I found their eyes darting around the room,
right,
looking to find a more important person, usually a man,
right,
to talk to. have the viewpoint as a feminist that the workplace can take those feminine qualities out of us, those nurturing, helping qualities, and we become like the capitalist system that we go to work for.
Right. Yeah, and I think lots of feminists would push back on the idea that it's like, and this is kind of a moot point, but a lot of them would say, I don't care about this nurturing thing. Why should I care about that? I want to get ahead as a woman. I don't want to have to, and that is a kind of feminism. It's not the kind of feminism I identify with or aspire towards, which is why I keep thinking maybe we actually have to draw a line in the sand. I'm not kidding. Like, we can all go to abortion rallies together, but I wonder if there just needs to be a new kind of feminism, because I feel so little in common with someone who makes excuses for anything Hillary does, vilifies anything Sanders does, and doesn't care about, again, the $15 an hour thing. It just, and again, I have a more universal view. Like, I'm a feminist. I definitely identify as a feminist, but I'm also, more generally social justice, economic justice, racial justice. I would care about the minimum wage, even if it weren't particularly a women's issue. But the fact that I just don't get how a feminist can claim to be intersectional and not even mention the $15 minimum wage issue, which I didn't hear them mention, and which Neera Tanden was fighting tooth and nail against on the platform committee. The other thing is there's such rampant dishonesty. Like, okay, I know that there's certain stereotypes of Bernie people. Maybe we can be stubborn. I'm so tired of the purist argument, by the way, but that's another issue. But there's such dishonesty. Like, Susan Bordo, her piece, she basically makes the claim that Sanders was dishonest because he pretended that he and Hillary were different levels of progressive and that he was more progressive than her. So she thinks that was his lie, the way he tricked people. And of course, it's so condescending. All of us young people are dupes. But in the very same piece, she quotes someone else who says that, yeah, Sanders is more progressive. And the very point that she points to is that if Sanders is the standard by which we judge progressives, no one's going to be progressive because he's such an outlier. That's fine. And you can say that makes him an unrealistic reference point, but that totally contradicts her point, which is that they're equally progressive. You can't say both things at the same time, but she does, because it's not that rational, and it's a personal thing, and it's an exploration and again, like it's I think feminism to be feminism for me goes outside, like you were saying, the individual liberation. It goes beyond the self. Because honestly, if you're for minimum wage because it makes sense for you, but you don't really care about not minimum wage. If you're for pay equity, but you don't, this is actually good. I just thought of this. It's a good litmus test. If you care about pay equity, and you as a stockbroker want to make $500,000, I don't know what it is, $500,000, just like the male stockbroker, and good on you, you should. But if that's your priority and the people earning minimum wage isn't, then that's not even feminism. That's just self-interestism. This is being rational.
Something about that, because this identity politics is not just about women's issues, it's also about people of color issues. Because I was arguing on a Facebook page of a friend who is part of Black Lives Matter in another city, and he had posted, why are white people getting all bent out of shape about Obama making $400,000 for a speech?
Right.
And pointed out the fact that blacks have such little wealth in this country that should we begrudge a brother for getting his own? And I had to point out that I would object to anybody making that kind of money for a speech, because I think it's obscene to make $400,000 for a speech.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that it totally explains why he didn't prosecute any of the banksters.
Right. Yeah.
And so someone who actually administered the African Americans for Bernie page wrote back in a comment, Lauren, tell me the last 3 white people you called out for excessive compensation. And luckily, I had all the names at the tip of my tongue.
Right.
There was Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, Charles and David Koch,
right.
3 CEOs of Cigna, Anthem, and Aetna that make $17 million a year. I mean, this is the thing. If we don't start identifying as the 99%, this is how they divide us.
Right.
They want us to think our class is more oppressed than the other class. And that's how they pit the Native Americans against the African Americans, against the Latinx, against women, and we're too busy fighting each other.
Right.
And that's why I joined Occupy, because it was the first meme that made sense to me. It was the 99% versus the 1%.
Right. Yeah.
Now I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the dishonesty and the disdain in her article. Because this comment, well, first of all, the dishonesty. She said Sanders' list did not include women's struggle for reproductive rights or affordable child care. Seriously? Have you ever heard Bernie Sanders make a speech where he didn't talk
Right.
about how women can't afford their child care? And then the next thing is, she did the same thing that Gloria Steinem did. She denigrated you guys, you millennial feminists, by saying that the best identifier for a younger generation longing for lives organized around something other than job hunting. Did you find that as insulting as I did?
Yeah, it was disgusting. And, you pointed out that thing. The problem is that there are so many examples of dishonesty that I couldn't keep track. But you pointing that out is great about Sanders. The other thing she did that was so dishonest is she pretended the super predator quote was not about kids.
Oh, yeah.
She just cut off the end where Hillary Clinton literally says, we're talking about kids who blah, 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 blah. I mean, I don't understand why The Guardian hasn't issued a retraction. It's a blatant lie. She also referred to a segregation rally, an anti-segregated housing thing that Bernie Sanders was arrested for. Of course, she gets it wrong, and who can blame her? He was going to so many different civil rights issues, actions. But she calls what he did was he led a sit-in. He helped organize Chicago's first sit-in ever. And that was over the segregated housing that was like not official. They did an investigation. They found that people who were the University of Chicago owned houses, and the people who were running them would not rent them out to Black students. So this was a sit-in about that. So Susan Bordo refers to this as a real estate investment. It's so dishonest. I mean, if I were a Hillary Clinton feminist, I would be embarrassed by this and not want it to be read. I'd be like, this doesn't represent me. I mean, you can defend Hillary and be honest about it. It's a little problematic, but it can be done.
Now I want to pivot over to the story about Heath Mello.
Yeah.
Because that's another opportunity for them to pounce on Bernie.
Right.
Elise Hogue and Joan Walsh and Joy Reid and the usual suspects came in, but this time they were clever. They included Tom Paris in it.
Right.
And they basically said that the Democratic Party was now endorsing pro-life people. Again, completely fabricating Heath Mello's record and saying that he pushed a bill that would require a woman going in for abortion view an ultrasound of her fetus, when in fact he changed the bill so that it would just make it available. And while he did have a very bad...
Yeah, he said it was required that the doctor tell the woman. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was but the way they presented it was that it was a forced ultrasound bill, as if and that's very different. I'm not a fan of any of these, obviously, but there is a difference. Let's not pretend that there's not a difference between a forced ultrasound, which makes a woman have a transvaginal ultrasound, and the difference between that and saying that a doctor has to tell the woman that it's an option. And to be totally honest, because again, I've been criticizing the other side as being dishonest. Like he himself, Mello said that he was hoping this would result in fewer abortions. So he did think his hope was that it would be a deterrent. Now, my issue is that if you want to have that as a litmus test, ironically, for people who constantly say that Sanders is a purist, he endorsed this guy and they're not okay with it because it doesn't pass their litmus test, which is abortion. And I'm not even saying that's a bad litmus test to have. I'm just saying, let's be honest about it. We all have purity politics to some extent, and we all have litmus tests, but it's the hypocrisy again. These people did not say anything, or they said very little about Tim Kaine, very little about Bob Casey. Bob Casey went around and, opened for Hillary Clinton, all these pro-life, anti-choice politicians. And I just realized that Marcy Clatcher, I can't remember her name. Yeah. She's a good one. She's actually, I talked about with Sarah Jaffe, and she's one of the people. Sarah Jaffe is like very few of them have really good politics besides that. And she names Captor. She says most of them are just walking piles of trash or something. And what's really funny is that I just remembered that what people, you know, Tom Watson and Peter Dow and all these people went after Bernie for endorsing Captor because she was not pro-choice enough. But again, it's just the hypocrisy. It's a double standard. And they're setting back the abortion rights movement. They're playing politics with this stuff. This is not how you're going to protect access to abortion. It's just not. And no one trusts them.
Well, she also did not reveal that he got a 100% voting record with Planned Parenthood in 2015 because they've gotten him to evolve on this issue. And he's committed that his personal views would not affect his policies.
Right.
So that's really all that we can ask for.
Yeah. What else do they want? Seriously. Did Tim Kaine
herself talked about third trimester abortion?
I know. I tweeted something. I was like, remember when Bernie said that he compromised on abortion? Oh, no, you don't, because he never did. That was Hillary. And again, the excuses, just be honest about it. Like you have no credibility when you never hold your politicians' feet to the fire. I mean, that's just on a Machiavellian level. That's what gets me. That's what's crazy. Speaking of Tom Watson, by the way, just very quickly, he's I don't know if you remember this. He compared Bernie Sanders supporters to Nazis. He said like all we needed was like I can't remember what it was, but it was something about brown. It was about Nazis enough that he deleted it and he had to apologize. I just saw that he tweeted a photo that was of Democratic socialists. It's from some historical archive thing. Democratic socialists holding a sign. It's like, why can't we try peace with Hitler? You know, Hitler didn't attack us. I was like, so I tweeted out just to get a sense of the dishonesty issue. I was like, in case you thought that Tom Watson's apology for the Nazi comparison was sincere, here he is smearing Democratic socialists as Hitler lovers. And he was like, how dare you? What WTF are you talking about? I mean, there's no honesty here. What are the odds that this man who spends his entire time on Twitter smearing Sanders, smearing anyone associated with him? Just today, he went after Cenk Uygur, who went up multiple times. He went after Jordan from the Young Turks. And then he randomly posts an image of Democratic socialists, and forget whether or not it's real. People are debating that. Forget that. The important thing is that it's an image. It says Democratic socialists, and it shows them being soft on Hitler. So, again, it's just so I was like, wouldn't you, after apologizing for that and deleting that other tweet, wouldn't you be a little bit more on your toes about not looking like you're once again like using?
Well, I love when they get their comeuppance.
Yeah.
Because it was pointed out in Nebraska that the people on the ground really wanted this guy to be elected, and they said what Elise Hogue and her minions did was interfere with their ability to get this progressive guy, and they had worked to change him over these years.
Yeah.
And then also, she was confronted with her hypocrisy about Tim Kaine, and the author who wrote that article that you sent me, no, I guess it was the Nation article.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
There was the update in which she was asked about Kaine, or actually when, at the time she was asked about Kaine, she said, quote, I don't think we're in the business of thought policing. I'm okay with people having their own ideas as long as they don't prevent people from exercising their rights. Right. So there you go.
I guess like their thing is that their shtick is that if you don't have bad voting records, I don't care if you're anti-choice personally. But the thing is, he did pass things, Tim Kaine. You know, I get Mario Cuomo is like fine for me. You know, Mario Cuomo is one of those people who's personally against it, but thinks that it should never, women's rights should never be interfered with. But yeah, it's the like lack of transparency. And again, they're fine, Tim Kaine, but what about Bob Casey? Why weren't they upset about Bob Casey opening for her? In fact, I want to do some kind of like quiz where you have to guess like which anti-choice person said it or did it.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out. Tim Kaine had been someone with Tim Kaine's politics had been a Sanders person. There would be none of this. I'm not thought police. It would have been, how dare he endorse someone who thinks it's his place to talk about women's bodies or something. Sorry, but
right. Tom Harris, who has no spine, he immediately backtracked and said, oh, no, of course, the DNC would never support a candidate that wasn't pro-choice, all the way, 100%. And then, of course, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Elizabeth Sanders disagreed with that. So I love that.
Elizabeth Warren.
That's what I mean, Elizabeth Warren, sorry.
Right. No, I mean, yeah, it's pathetic. Yeah, it's so transparent. It's just so incredibly transparent that it's politically motivated and has more to do with that than it does. I mean, these people have such a hatred of Sanders. They really think that he stole this right of this thing that Hillary deserved as a birthright almost, or a marriage right. I mean, I get it. Like, she had to I feel bad. Well, whatever. That's another story. But someone wrote on the comments, would you vote for Thatcher? Of course we wouldn't vote for Thatcher. That's the whole point. I mean, that's the point, is that it's not gender or it's not identity. I mean, I wouldn't have voted to confirm Clarence Thomas either. That doesn't, he faced racism. I'm sure he does.
By the way, I don't know if you know this, but we have Joe Biden to thank for Clarence Thomas.
Oh yeah, he was horrible on Anita Hill.
And Anita Hill, there were other women that had been harassed.
And he didn't let them testify, right?
Yes, he did not let them testify.
Yeah, he was awful, Joe Biden, on that.
Yeah. So what else have you been writing about lately?
What else have I been? Well, I do my show every week. So last week I had on, Rashad Robinson from Color of Change. He talked about how they got rid of Bill O'Reilly, but they're good because they really take a kind of intersectional approach to things. And I had Rania Khalek talk about Syria. Ben Norton talk about Syria, Nanda Villa talk about Syria and North Korea. What else have I been? I want to write up my interview with Rania because it's really interesting. And
share with us some of the things that she said.
She's been to Syria and she's been attacked, and they've tried to cancel her speeches places, and they've succeeded in some, and others they haven't. And her big thing is really like, she has family in Syria, and her big thing is like, yeah, Assad is no angel. It's a police state, but like, it's them fighting off like Al-Qaeda. Like, what do we want? I mean, there are two issues for her. One is like, she thinks that it would be way worse. And once you destabilize a country, there's no going back. And we saw this with Iraq. And then the other thing is she just like, there are two issues. One is whether or not the current government would be better or worse than the next one. The other issue is why we should whether we should go to war. And my thing is kind of like, I don't like Assad. That doesn't mean that I think we should intervene or go to war or spend like human lives or civilian lives of Syrians. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, Tulsi was attacked too, because Tulsi's like one of the only people who spoke out about it. But yeah, Rania got attacked by Shane Bauer, who was this good journalist. He was one of the guys who was kidnapped by the Iranians when they were like hiking in Iraq and crossed over into Iran. And he's been good. He's been really critical of Clinton. I love that. That's like my litmus test. But he does really good journalism. Rania said this, that she really likes his work, and that, but he's so angry at her, and he says like Rania's Druze, Druze. And he was like, Rania's position is just a generic sectarian Druze position. And Rania was telling me like she was so offended, like imagine saying that about any other group, like it's a generic Black position or generic Jewish position.
I don't know if you know, but since October, I've been talking about the Syrian situation, saying that it's nothing that they're telling us.
Yeah.
And it's all about regime change. It's all about this pipeline they want to get through from Qatar to Europe that Assad didn't want there. The fact that the white helmets are not the good guys. Right. I mean, I've been on this since October.
Yeah, you should definitely have Rania on.
I will. I gotta.
She's so persona non grata. Like no places will. I mean, she's been really like blacklisted and smeared.
I'm totally connecting with her because.
Yeah.
Ro Khanna, congressman from CD17, he's the newly elected congressman from Silicon Valley. He's going to be on my show next Sunday.
Great.
And he's very interested in hearing these alternative points of view. So, I tried to express this to my own congressman, Ted Lieu, at his town hall last week. And I talked about how this constant Russia baiting was fomenting a new Cold War with Russia, which is going to turn into a hot war with a nuclear power.
And it's also...
And then Trump
Yeah.
Trump actually bombed the airfield to prove that he was not in cahoots with Putin.
Right.
And I had Norman Solomon on my show on Wednesday, who wrote an article about this in Common Dreams on April 10th. And then on April 20th, he wrote an article saying something else I've been saying, which is they are using this as a distraction to not admit why they lost the election, which is focusing on identity politics and fear of Trump. So
Right.
now they're doing it again.
Right. They're not offering anything positive.
Exactly. I said if you want to win in 2018,
Right.
stop talking about Trump and Russia.
Yeah.
And start talking about things that the people want to hear about.
Yeah.
You know, single payer health care, increasing the minimum wage.
Right.
You know, affordable housing.
I had Adam Gaffney on, who's a doctor and a single payer advocate. And he said something really great about that. I said, what do you say to people who are just like, it's a pipe dream, single payer, it'll never happen? He's like, people who say that things can't happen are often the people who think it shouldn't happen. And yeah, I mean, the thing with the Russia stuff is that no one who doesn't already dislike Trump cares about that. It's not an effective organizing or persuasion tool. Nobody cares about it because, in fact, they saw that. I mean, people I know who barely follow the news, are not that educated, hated Hillary, voted for, were probably would have voted for Bernie, but wound up voting for Trump. And if I have to hear Paul Krugman or anyone else use that as a diss on Sanders, I'm like, no. You want the person who can peel away voters for Trump. What is wrong with you that you see that as bad? I don't understand.
You don't understand.
Yeah, they have no.
The Republicans in the suburbs.
Yeah,
They
right.
still are
Right.
going for that philosophy.
Right.
Somebody just wrote something the other day that says we can win in
Yeah.
2018 without getting a single Trump voter.
Well, that's what's his name said. The horrible guy from Pennsylvania, Ed. He was governor.
Rendell.
Oh yeah, he said that. That's what they were going to do. I think Schumer said that too. And it's just really inexcusable. And it's it's an attempt to have a wedge between workers. I mean, it's just. I mean, I always thought that like that was the thing. We want to persuade workers. We want workers to realize why it's not in their self-interest to be manipulated by xenophobia and all this stuff. And it's just, that's another thing that's insane to me. The narrative around the economic anxiety versus racism stuff. Like, do you not know your history? I thought it was like common knowledge and accepted knowledge that when there is economic upheaval, people are that much more susceptible to scapegoating people. Like, isn't that what the Holocaust showed us? Like Weimar Germany? I mean, it wasn't like a total bubble. I mean, there's all these historiographical debates over the economic stuff versus the just anti-Semitic stuff. But no one I know thinks this wasn't all innate German anti-Semitism. I mean, there's a reason it happened right after the economy collapsed, right after the Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germans. And this other really weird thing that I don't understand is how people say that, like, they point to the fact that some people will, when asked, will say what they care about and what they, whether it's Brexit or voting for Trump. And they're like, well, I care about immigrants taking our jobs. And then people will point to that and say, you see, they didn't say that they cared about neoliberal policies or trade. That's the whole point. That's how it works. They don't know that, right? That's what Trump does or whoever does. They get the person to blame. Like Nazis wouldn't have been like, or Nazi sympathizers, they wouldn't have been like, oh, well, I'm really mad about the economic situation, but I'd rather not focus on that, so I'm going to be scapegoating the Jews. That's the whole point. They don't know that. That's how it works. Like, people have such a bad understanding of history and fascism.
That's why I was a history major.
Yeah.
There's that great quote by George Santayana, those that don't understand history are condemned to
right.
repeat it.
Oh, and then we have these people right now doing that with let's not look back and see what happened. It's time to move forward. You can't move forward without realizing what happened in 2016 that gave the country to Trump. You know what we didn't talk about was the smear campaign that's really been upped because of that poll that came out that shows that Sanders is more popular has a higher favorability rating among people of color and women than among white men. And that's driving people crazy. It's a Harvard-Harris poll. And watching these people try to it's just a Harvard poll. Like, okay, you loved Harvard yesterday. I don't know what your problem is.
Yeah. Did you see
No.
Well, Jake Huber is not only the host of Young Turks, but he also has an organization called Wolfpack.
Right.
And Wolfpack wants to have a constitutional convention to have an amendment to overturn Citizens United. Because he does not believe that the Congress will willingly vote to get money out of politics. So it's a legitimate view.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. He's now tangling with Common Cause, which is a venerated organization
Right.
that's been around for decades. It was started by Ralph Nader. And they are saying that a constitutional convention could turn into a runaway convention. And I had Alex Koch on my show last month. He wrote an article about the Koch brothers and how they are funding this movement to have a constitutional convention because they want to have a balanced budget amendment and all sorts of other right-wing amendments.
Right.
So when you open it up like this, anything can happen. So there's been a battle going on, and Jake has used the airwaves, the Young Turks, to have people contact Common Cause and say, stop fucking with us, because apparently they had some sort of hearing, and Common Cause interfered. I don't know all the details, but if you don't know it, I guess we can't really...
Yeah, I don't. I'll look into it.
Yeah. But it was interesting because it's kind of like the new guard versus the old guard.
Right.
And I know, because I've worked with both groups, that they are both well-intentioned, honest brokers. They really do want to see money out of politics.
Right.
And they just have a difference in tactics.
I would disagree. I think like representation is, in fact, Sanders got smeared for this because he didn't ever say that we have to move. I wrote a piece about this in Paste if you want to see it. It's called Sanders Nails It on Identity Politics and the Media Gets It All Wrong or something. It's not that they got it wrong. They intentionally misled it. His whole thing is that we have to move beyond identity politics. Of course, representation is enough. He was very explicitly saying that representational politics and having more diversity is necessary but insufficient, which I agree with. I don't think we have to like go to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Like I think that we can acknowledge that policy is more important and that also it is important to have representation if possible. But again, the issue is if you have a way better candidate who's a man versus a woman, you go with, I believe that's the basis of affirmative action too, right? Affirmative action is that you have two equally qualified people. One is from a group that's underrepresented. You go for that person. I don't have any problems with that. I know some people think it's like reactionary. How can we get rid of racism when we have that? I don't buy that because it's not like we have an equal playing field. So, but there's a difference between just by default of their gender and taking policy into account. Policy is first and foremost. Again, my thing is that if they're equal, all things being equal, you go for the person who's underrepresented.
And I also think there should be a category for the economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
I remember the Bakke case when I was young, where Alan Bakke sued a university for reverse racism, saying that he didn't get in, he had equal grades, which I don't think he actually did. And I forget what happened with that case. I think it might have been in the 70s. But it was after that case that they started to take away some of these affirmative action policies. Well, I know what I wanted to talk to you about. Just real quick.
Sure.
It's going to go on a little long, but this whole thing with Milo Yiannopoulos, however you pronounce his name, and now Ann Coulter being prevented from speaking.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm against it.
Against preventing them from speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I'm a First Amendment person, and I feel that the best antidote to bad speech is good speech. And I remember in 1978, I was interning at WBC-TV in Boston for a summer internship in the news department, and it was the big summer when the American Nazi Party wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois.
Right. The ACLU defended them.
Illinois, yes, there were a lot of Holocaust survivors there, and they defended it. And I said at the time, what I would have them do is do their march and then have the Anti-Defamation League of the Jewish Federation do their own counter march and rally.
Right.
So what's happened is that it's very triggering.
Yes.
And Milo, in particular, his appearance there could have triggered some violence.
Well, yeah, and also because he was going to out a transgender person. Yeah, which is not, yeah. I mean, I think there's standards. I think that, I mean, the thing is that it's not free. People often conflate free speech with non-free speech issues. So free speech means that Ann Coulter is allowed to, the government cannot tell Ann Coulter she can't speak there. So it's really, it is up to the university to decide to invite someone or uninvite someone. I mean, my question is really like whether or not it helps. I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, of course, that person has the right to be invited. The university has the right to invite her. I think it's kind of a strategic issue whether or not you should want the person to be able to speak there. I mean, whether or not you want the university to keep that. I certainly don't think it's awful to argue that position, that free speech is, not free speech, that you know, countering an event with something is a good way to oppose it. But again, I do feel like what you're saying with triggering, like, I don't know, it's such hate speech. But I don't think Sanders is, I mean, people are making this really stupid comparison between, what is it? Sanders, oh my God, Sanders saying that, like the new paradigm of the left is Sanders saying that, is Sanders defending Ann Coulter's right to speak, but people not letting Obama make money for a speech. And you know what? That's such BS. I'm sorry. It's a travesty. In fact, I tweeted, I was like, you need to stop doing analogies. Like, all you have to do is like watch Legally Blonde to get why. That's really dumb. The idea that it's, like you said, you had named a bunch of white people who you would criticize, and people are like, oh, well, when's the last president? First of all, George Bush, everyone on the left hated him, thought he was disgusting. Like, there was no expectation that he wouldn't do something like that. No one would even, like, why would we call him out? It's like such an obvious thing. Everyone hated him. The same with Obama is there was some expectation the whole time that he'd be better. And then there was expectation now that maybe at least he wouldn't, for optics sake, do that after the Wall Street stuff, right? I joked today on Twitter, I was like, if the millennials criticizing Obama aren't racist, then why didn't they say anything about Gerald Ford? Of course, because we weren't born then.
So we've reached the end of our hour. Can I ask you to come back sometime?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I'm on Twitter at letter K, letter T, HALPS, so right there. And then you can find the Katie Halper Show on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/the Katie Halper Show, you'll get bonus episodes. You can find the show on iTunes. You can subscribe. It's just the Katie Halper Show on SoundCloud. And my website is katiehalper.com.
I wanted to just promote my upcoming shows. Tomorrow I'm going to be having Stephen Jaffe, who is challenging Nancy Pelosi. Thank God. He's a Bernie Kratz. And next Sunday, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to have Congressman Ro Khanna. And I'm hoping to get my friend John Emerson, who was the ambassador to Germany. He was Barack Obama's ambassador to Germany for the last 4 years. And he was also a major Bill Clinton bundler and fundraiser, and a Barack Obama fundraiser and bundler. And also later in the month, I'm going to be live streaming from the Democratic Convention up in Sacramento, where we are hoping that the progressive candidate for Democratic Party state chair, Kimberly Ellis, will beat out Boss Bauman. I call him Boss Bauman because he's like an old-style party boss.
Right.
And he was the one who took money from Big Pharma to oppose Prop 61, which would have lowered prescription drug costs for 14% of California residents. I also want to have on John Matthew Lurie, who just wrote a very good article on North Korea and South Korea, something that I'm totally unfamiliar with. So I'm hoping that he will see my private message, and he will be able to be on the show this Wednesday night. So again, Katie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, this is great.
It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll have to have you come on my show to talk about the convention.
Oh, I'd love to. Okay, thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good